How many shared parameters can be loaded into a project? How shall we do if we have, or what should we do if we have more than one shared parameter to be used in the project? And does the shared parameter in the Revit link conflict with the one in the major model?
I'll kick things off here, guys. I think the first question's easy. How many shared parameters can be loaded? That's unlimited. There's really no hard limit that I've personally found as far as how many shared parameters you can use. In fact, your shared parameter file itself is just a text file. It's just an index of your custom parameter names. So that can be as long as it needs to be. And then as they're needed within the project as a project parameter or within families as a family parameter, I don't think there really is a limit to how many you can use. And that kind of ties into the second question, which is, what should you do if you have more than one shared parameter to be used in a project? If I understand that correctly, I just explained that you can use as many as you'd like. And that's the idea there, is as many custom parameters that we need to leverage to produce our deliverables, we can load them in as we need. There are best practices with that. One that I particularly use is to use all caps or some sort of naming designation for your shared parameters. That way, as they are loaded into a project or into a family, yourself as well as other users can tell which are shared parameters that are coming from your shared parameter file and which are built-in system parameters or just native family or project parameters. So just having a good designation between your shared parameters and your other types of native parameters is a good management technique to be able to track what shared parameters are in each project and are being used in schedules and filters and tags and things of that nature.
Yeah, I agree with that, Brian. My interpretation of that second question, trying to read the whole thing sort of in context, is slightly different because of the last question. Does the shared parameter in the Revit link conflict with the one in the major model? Because of that, I interpret the second question as, where can you have more than one shared parameter to be used in the project, as if they're the same shared parameter. Mm. I'm not sure for the person who wrote that if that's what you meant. So we'll try to tackle both. That way, whichever way you meant that, we can answer it. But as we mentioned earlier, when you look at a shared parameters, as far as Revit's concerned, it's a GUID, right? The name, of course, matters, but it doesn't matter to Revit as much as the GUID. So I can have a shared parameter. I can create, for instance, a shared parameter with the same name that a different shared parameter has, but Revit will still see them as different shared parameters. The challenge with that is less about whether or not you can do that and more about it's going to confuse everybody. Because when you put in a shared parameter and it uses the same name as another shared parameter, because Revit see them as two separate parameters, they're not the same as far as Revit's concerned. When I go to tag my thing, my family, whatever it is that I'm tagging, and then Brian goes to try to tag his, and we're using the same name but different shared parameters, we're going to get different data. I'm going to get a report that's going to look different from his, because I might be trying to tag a family that's pulling his shared parameter with the name that matches my shared parameter name, but it's not pulling the data that I'm trying to pull. So that's why we were talking about earlier as well, why it's important to have a single source of truth for that shared parameter. And then Brian had mentioned making sure that the team knows where it's coming from, where it's stored on the server, those types of things. That's why it's important to have that done, and to have, again, a single source of truth for that, so that you don't have that kind of confusion. If you're working with, when you talk about Revit links and you're working with external parties, let's say you're an architect and you're working with a mechanical engineer, structural engineer, what have you, that's where the BEP and the BIM kickoff meetings become important, because you can have those conversations about what shared parameters we use in our project. This is what's there. Don't use these same names. Oh, we have a conflict. Okay, well, how are we going to address this conflict?
And just to add on to that, Jeff, I just want to point out that when you're in a model, the content that you're applying shared parameters to, as we've seen, for example, this pipe end prep, they show up associated to those elements in your model. If you have linked files where they're using their own shared parameters, so for example, if I just select the, let me turn this on here, the architect's vanity fixture here, they may have their own shared parameters being used and associated to this fixture. They could even be a shared parameter of the same name and purpose that I have in my model. When it comes to working with our parameters, especially with schedules and tags, when we create any sort of schedule, one of the key parts here in our field settings is whether we are including elements from our links or not. And that, if this is checked, then that's where you would want to be concerned about possibly seeing some of the shared parameters from that linked file. Otherwise, you should be limited to just the shared parameters that you have utilized in your project here on this side.